Hello, it's nice to meet you. Last time I explained worksheet 5, which is about securing necessary competencies, and mentioned that since it's not possible to handle all the different areas at once, it would be good to set priorities and create a step-by-step action plan. At that time, I introduced the priority matrix and boundary circle as tools for setting priorities. Today we will be working on worksheet 6, setting milestones for each phase. When we say for each phase, it already implies that there is a priority order based on the timeline. Additionally, even within each phase, there are priorities for each area. Today as well, I will explain by showing you a sample. The first sample I will introduce is a continuation from last time. It's a sample from a household with a child around elementary school age. If you look here, you can see that it is divided into 3 phases. The first phase lasts about 1 to 2 years, the second phase about 3 years, and the third phase about 5 years. As you can see here, although the details aren't very specific, in this child's case, the goal after graduation is to attend a day program. So until then, the focus is primarily on self-care, such as managing diapers or proper toileting. Then, as the child continues with school life, a significant portion, especially at the bottom, is dedicated to government support, meaning preparations that need to be made in order to enter an adult program. This is summarized in this way. What I'd like to spend a bit more time explaining today is the next worksheet. As I mentioned last time, this was a worksheet from a family with a child in the 2nd grade of elementary school. If you look here, it says first draft. I'll explain this in a moment, but this is the content of worksheet 6 that the mother initially filled out and brought in. If you look here, it's divided into phase 1, 2, and 3. That's because this family was planning to stay in Canada for about 2 years, so phase 1 is life in Canada, then about 2 years after returning to Korea, and finally, about 3 years after graduating from elementary school. That's how the phases were divided. As you can see here, the categories are organized under social. The first category is communication, the second is behavior, and the third is making friends. There's a reason why I want to explain this in detail. If you look here under communication, under Canada Life, you'll see understanding the situation. Stop saying out of context and understanding the other person's speech, as you can see. Then in the second phase, it says things like improve contextual communication skills to answer a question properly. And in the third stage as well, it mentions expressing oneself in complete sentences according to the situation and describing your own situation in detail. As you can see from these contents, in every area it is structured in a way that aims to improve or correct your child or to educate them in this manner. I will explain these things in more detail later, but after reviewing all these contents, I give comments to everyone who attended, and we also have discussions with the participants. I would like to read you the comment I gave. Regarding the current situation, this child has many strengths and many things they like. However, there are difficulties due to the different language and being in a new environment. It would be best to make plans in a direction that can give the child confidence and emotional stability. By engaging in as many of the strengths and interests listed in the profile as possible, you can help the child build confidence. Encourage confidence and emotional stability through empathy, praise, and encouragement. Rather than trying to fix what the child dislikes or struggles with, encourage them to do what they enjoy and are good at, so that this develops in a positive direction and even current problematic behaviors can be improved. Difficulties at school due to language barriers are addressed through a special education assistant who can speak both English and Korean. While learning English would be beneficial, if the plan is to eventually return to Korea, the focus should be less on learning English and more on expanding relationships and ensuring a happy daily life. Continue to create environments where small groups can gather and play, or where the child can interact with peer groups at the Korean church. Make sure that the order is not reversed, so that necessary skills are trained within the direction mentioned above. Meaning, do not let training take away the enjoyment. Cultivate the right mindset and attitude as parents. A child's life depends on their parents. The happiness of the parents is the happiness of the child. Let's also make sure that parents live happily. And now I mentioned AOA earlier. Accepting, opening, and asking. These are important. In other words, acknowledge your child as they are. Don't hide it and ask those around you for help. Parents should not get angry at or yell at their children. As an expected effect, it is anticipated that through increased confidence and emotional stability, better relationships can be maintained at school and areas of concern will also be alleviated. Additionally, while it is necessary to set a 10-year plan, for now, it would be better to focus on a 2 to 3 year plan. Let the 10-year plan focus on major milestones and make the 1-year plan more detailed. For now, while you are here in Canada, make sure to live as joyfully and happily as possible. Let's make sure to set clear priorities and focus on the most important areas. As for work after returning to Korea, let's worry about that when the time comes. These are the comments I gave. After that, this person discussed things with me, listened to my comments, and through our conversation, brought a final draft that was different from the first draft they had made at the beginning, which had focused on the child and tried to fix the child. If you compare them, this is the final version after the revisions, and there are some additional elements included. What was moved to the top of the priority list is that the first thing added was a category called parent mindset. This is something that was not included in the worksheet categories we had created. So it means that you are free to modify this as much as you want to suit your own needs. So there are 2 main categories that were added. One is parent mindset and the other is positive mindset. So even in the first aspect of life in Canada, the number one thing in parent mindset is acknowledge, that is accepting. Next, the second is empathizing. And then the third is finding what they like, finding what your child likes. And then the fourth is making it a goal of the parent mindset to control the things that make parents angry. Even in the second phase, after returning to Korea, continuing to empathize remains important. Next, controlling parental anger, then adapting to a new environment, and then waiting until your child is able to do things on their own. These were all included. And in the final phase as well, let's make sure to understand our child's communication code well. Then let's be patient and wait. These kinds of things were included. When I saw this, I felt incredibly grateful and fulfilled. I was truly thankful that through this workshop, parents' mindsets could be transformed in this way. And if you look at the second category, it's labeled positive mind, isn't it? So it says, let's enjoy the good things. So while they were in Canada, they traveled a lot, ate delicious food, had fun at playgrounds, watched TV together as a family, and shared lots of physical affection. Basically, they decided to give their child as many enjoyable, positive, and happy experiences as possible. Similarly, in the second phase, the idea is to look for things that the child enjoys. And after school, as well as on weekends, let's do a lot of the things the child enjoys. Then, in the third phase, let's try to discover which areas the child is talented in, what they like, and what their strengths are. In this way, the approach has completely changed by 180 degrees. There are also things like making friends and various other aspects later on, but just by introducing these first 2 categories, you can clearly see how things have changed. After that, I listened to the follow-up stories. After doing this, there was an opportunity to talk about what kind of changes had occurred. I heard that once the parents changed their approach like this, their child found much greater emotional stability, and many of the problematic behaviors that had existed before were alleviated and improved. So I've conducted this workshop several times, and I can say that this is one of the most memorable experiences for me. Now I've shared 2 examples with you, and next time I'll explain in more detail about my own child, focusing more specifically on the detailed action plans. Today, following these 2 samples, I want to mention that I've held this kind of workshop about 6 times over several years, usually gathering around 5 families each time. After completing all of these, there are some general comments I tend to make, as well as common patterns I've noticed. So I'd like to take this time to introduce some of those observations. The first general comment I want to make is this. As I mentioned above, this is something that commonly occurs. In other words, there's often too much focus on trying to fix the child, which can end up causing stress for the child, or even worse, making things worse for them. This is a phenomenon commonly seen among parents who are very dedicated to their child's treatment. So one of the things I often say when I conduct workshops or counsel parents, which might sound a bit strange, is don't try too hard. Take it a little slower. I often emphasize that parents' rest and peace of mind are extremely important. So in the case of the person I mentioned earlier, I would say it's a great example of someone who, through these workshops, shifted from trying to fix their child to focusing on cultivating a positive mindset and building good experiences as a parent. Second, a comment I often make is that parents try to do too many things at once. I can't really call myself an expert, but from what I've studied and from my experience at work, one of my main tasks was developing company strategies. And what's really important in strategy is this: it's not about adding, but about subtracting. When people make strategies, they come up with lots of ideas, thinking it would be great to do this and that, but what's important is not trying to do everything, but rather how much you can take away. And it's crucial to set priorities well. Surprisingly, subtracting is not easy, because it feels like it would be good to do everything. So people get greedy and try to do it all. But when you actually do that, your chances of success are actually lower. You might even give up halfway. That's why, even if it's something small, prioritizing the smaller things and steadily putting them into practice and achieving them is a very important point in strategy. So when you make these kinds of plans, don't try to do too many things at once. Set priorities and proceed step by step and boldly. Let go of things you can give up, or rather than giving up, just postpone them for later. You need to pay attention to progressing on step by step. Third, a common comment is that after I introduce the boundary circle, people find it difficult to distinguish between what should be inside the boundary circle and what should be outside. There are many cases where things that could be inside are placed outside. For example, even if something doesn't harm others or pose a serious risk to your own safety, people often think of it as an issue that absolutely must be fixed. So even though it could be inside, they end up putting it outside. But this isn't really a big problem. What actually becomes a real issue is this: there are cases where something that absolutely should be outside the boundary isn't placed outside. In other words, sometimes it's kept inside, or sometimes it's not included at all. In other words, it's an area that absolutely needs to be improved for themselves, but it's missing. Perhaps these kinds of behaviors are not seen at home or are less noticeable at home, but are much more apparent outside. For example, they might act aggressively or violently, say harsh things, or speak negatively to others. You may witness them saying things or behaving in ways that make others uncomfortable or distressed. However, these behaviors that trouble others make it difficult to form relationships, and as a result, the negative consequences ultimately come back to them, putting them in undesirable situations. Having difficulty being with others poses serious problems, not only in education and employment, but even in friendships and participation in programs. So this becomes quite a significant issue. Therefore, I believe that, by any means necessary, it is important to come up with and implement solutions to improve situations where it is hard to be with others. Now, the fourth comment I often make is also related to the third point I just mentioned. It concerns cases where people are unable to properly set priorities or identify the areas they should focus on. In other words, they try to focus on areas where their efforts are unlikely to succeed. For example, if someone has been unable to do arithmetic for 20 years, but still spends a lot of time trying to somehow make progress in arithmetic, or if they've tried to learn English for 20 years without much success, but continue to invest a lot of time, in my view, if it hasn't worked for 20 years, it's not likely to become easy in the future either. So, since those things are actually within your boundaries, I think it's not very desirable to focus on them. Another example is trying to fix obsessive tendencies. This can be divided into two categories. There are serious obsessions that absolutely need to be addressed, and then there are others that don't really harm other people. So if it's something that really harms others or is a serious problem, you definitely need to seek professional help and make an effort to improve it. But if that's not the case, these obsessions aren't something that can be fixed just by telling yourself what to do or not to do. In fact, I think making your surroundings more comfortable actually helps more in overcoming these obsessions. That's my personal experience. I'm not an expert, but that's how I feel. Or, for example, putting things that are better done later at the top of your priority list. Usually, this kind of situation seems to occur when the focus is more on what the parents want rather than what the child wants. For example, the child may not really like studying and prefers doing other things, but if the parents are determined to send them to college, out of their own desire, that ends up becoming a priority. So, to sum up, rather than prioritizing or focusing on areas that are difficult to change, I think it's better to prioritize and concentrate on areas that the child likes and is good at. The comments I've made so far are quite generalized, so for those hearing this for the first time, it might not really resonate with you. However, for those who attended the workshop, since you're looking at the worksheet you filled out yourself and we're discussing and giving feedback based on that together with other families, I think it will be helpful if after completing the worksheet, you review the comments I've given and check whether they appropriately match the feedback. All right, we'll wrap up here for today. Next time, I'll show you the finalized transition plan for my child's adulthood and share my experience on how I set up specific action plans at each stage. Thank you for watching. See you next time.